how often do you greet people? Well, I'm an extrovert, so I end up greeting a lot of people. Whenever I'm at the store or whether I'm going for a walk and I cross someone's path and our gaze meet, I smile and I nod or might say hello or how are you doing? And I think it's probably because I'm from Alabama. At least that contributes to it. Those who are a little bit more culturally Southern have a problem with waving people down the road or starting conversations with random people. Like, for example, in Alabama, if you're the only person on the road and you see another person coming your way, you take your hand off the steering wheel and you wave and you smile. But I realized a little bit later in life, you don't do that everywhere. I remember the first time I went to Michigan, I experienced quite a bit of culture shock, and it was very difficult to me. Because when I was, like, for example, at Target or at Publix, I'd walk by someone and we'd make eye contact and I would smile and nod and they would immediately turn their head the other way. It's almost as if I was hurting them looking at them. It was quite a shock. Even the church culture is a little different. They're still very friendly, but they're more distant. I remember the first time I sat in a Michigan congregation, there was a couple that sat right next to me and Cheryl, and I told Cheryl, as soon as this is over, I'm going to talk to them. As soon as they said the final prayer, as I shook out my hand, they were gone. And I was like, well, this seems a little odd. So I purposely put myself in the middle of the aisle to intercept the first person I could find. And I saw a man, and I shook out my hand. I shook his hand. He smiled and nodded. So that was progress. And then he walked right past me. Now, not everyone was like that, but that's just how people are, depending where you're at from state to state. When I moved to Florida, the reactions are kind of mixed. If I'm in Orlando or Winter Park, about half the time people will smile and nod. About the other half, they'll just ignore me, and that's fine. But for whatever reason, whenever I'm in Altamont, people will smile and nod at me before I get to do it first, and it makes me so happy. But John tells us there are certain people you're never supposed to greet. In fact, he says if you greet them, you share in their sin. Well, this is a pretty strong command, and if this is as literal as it sounds, I'm going to be in trouble because I greet nearly everyone I see. I might have to back up because I don't want to partake in someone else's sin, but I think we would probably conclude John is talking about a little bit more than a hello. If you will, turn with me to the book of 2 John. One of the main themes that John is dealing with in this letter is truth, and we see this constantly referenced throughout. In fact, if you'll read with me the first two verses 1 and 2. The elder to the chosen lady and her children whom I love in truth, and not only I, but also all who know the truth, for the sake of the truth which abides in us, and will be with us forever. So we see even in the first two verses, the word truth is mentioned 3 times. And this is a consistent theme throughout the letter. And one of the reasons he wrote this letter is because there were many people who were not telling the truth about Christ in his nature. We see a little bit of, we see him describe these people starting in verse 7. If you'll read with me verses 7 through 11. For many deceivers have gone out into the world, those who do not acknowledge Jesus Christ as coming in the flesh. This is the deceiver and the Antichrist. Watch yourselves that you do not lose what we have accomplished, but that you may receive a full reward. Anyone who goes too far and does not abide in the teachings of Christ does not have God. The one who abides in the teaching, he has both the Father and the Son. If anyone comes to you and does not bring this teaching, do not receive him into your house, and do not give him a greeting. For the one who gives him a greeting participates in his evil deed. John says in verse 7 that there were deceivers who went out into the world. Now, in the first century, Christians had a lot of obstacles, and many of these obstacles took the form of false teachers. In the early decades of the church, one of the main obstacles or false teachers they had to deal with were Judaizers, people who were trying to bind the law of Moses on new Christian converts. We see this most notably, for example, in Acts chapter 15, verse 5. We see in that verse that thankfully many of the Pharisees converted to Christianity, which was a good sign. They weren't looking too good in the Gospels, but many of them converted to Christianity. But unfortunately, some of them were trying to bind the law on the new Gentile converts. And a lot of early Christians, especially in the first few decades, had a complicated relationship with the law of Moses. They didn't know where they were supposed to stand with it. We see this in, for example, 1 Timothy chapter 1. There were many at the church at Ephesus who wanted to be teachers of the law. We see, for example, in Galatians chapter 2, not just the whole book of Galatians. Yeah, we'll say the whole book of Galatians because it's there all throughout. We see the Galatians were struggling with their relationship with the law and how much of it they were supposed to keep. But as you look at the books that were written later in the first century, Christians are experiencing a new obstacle, a new kind of false teacher. Some who were trying to look and approach Christianity in a mystical way with a focus on supernatural knowledge and enlightenment. And it seems to be what John is dealing with here. Many suspect that John is dealing with the predecessors of what we would call the Gnostic movement in the 2nd century. Now, the term Gnostic is a bit of a catch-all term. There were, unfortunately, as many Gnostic groups as there are denominations today. But a lot of them had central ideas that we find here in this book, or we find scattered throughout the New Testament, such as they believed that matter, physical things were inherently evil, while spiritual things such as the spirit or the spiritual realm was naturally good. They also prized secret knowledge from the revealed from their teachers. They also viewed Christianity in the books of the Bible in a mystical way. And of course, they also had strange views about angels and God and the origin of the universe. But they had one really unusual view that John is dealing with here, as we see in verse 7. John tells us that there were those who were teaching and believing that Jesus did not come in the flesh. Some believed that there was this man, maybe named Jesus or so, and there was this spiritual teacher who came upon him like a phantom. And he gave this man Jesus all these miraculous teachings. And before Jesus could be crucified, this spiritual being, the thing about him that really mattered, left. And part of the reason they had such a weird idea is because they thought matter, physical things were bad. And so when some of them came to Christianity or appeared to come to Christianity, they had a rough time with seeing a physical Jesus, a Jesus who was both man and God, a Jesus who had flesh and blood. Now, you may ask, well, why would anyone come to this strange conclusion? Well, it appears many of these heretics had a combined philosophy that was sort of a mixture of Greek philosophy, of mysticism, of Judaism, and Christianity. And since they had this crooked foundation with all these weird ideas, it was very easy for them to believe even stranger ideas. And this is true of anyone in the world. If you have a poor worldview or a worldview that is built with a faulty foundation, it's very easy, unfortunately, to believe false doctrine. And notice what John says in verse 7 about these teachers. He says that they are lost. He calls them antichrists. Now, I know when many people think of the Antichrist, they think of Damien from the old Omen movie. That's probably not what John has in mind. You see, an Antichrist is anyone who is against Christ. And John says that anyone who does not accept this core doctrine of Christianity, or at the very least, teaches it to others, is against Christ. And as we see in verses 8 through 9, is lost. If you've become a Christian and then you begin to accept this idea and teach it to other people, you can lose your reward. And John says if you're teaching this, you're not with God. But doesn't that seem a little extreme? Doesn't that seem a little harsh? I mean, after all, they do believe in Jesus to some degree. But so is believing that Jesus came in the flesh that important? Well, yes, it is, for many reasons. Now, of course, we understand that there are many things that we may not fully understand about the Bible. I know 20 years from now, 30, 40 years from now, there are probably going to be many things that I don't fully understand. And God does not expect Christians to understand everything about the Bible. But there are certain things that are a prerequisite to believe to becoming a Christian. And there are certain things that a Christian is obligated to believe to maintain their faithfulness before God. But why is this one so important? Why is it so important to believe that Jesus came in the flesh? Well, unfortunately, many people do not think of all the implications of their beliefs. But what are the implications of believing that Jesus did not come in the flesh? Well, if Jesus did not come in the flesh, the atonement is gone. The entire, one of the main points of the gospel story is that Jesus shed his own blood to pay for our own sins. He was supposed to be the perfect Lamb of God. He was to take our place as a human and bear our punishment. Well, he can't do that if he didn't come in the flesh. He also can't be our high priest. The Hebrew writer emphasizes the idea that one of the purposes of a high priest is to be able to empathize with his brethren. Well, Jesus can't be our brethren. He can't be our high priest if he did not come in the flesh, if he did not share in our nature. His ability to mediate, to be the God-man, to stand in between us and God, is also gone. And also, what we consider the greatest demonstration of his love, which is his crucifixion, is also gone. All these central ideas and beliefs in Christianity are tied to the idea that Jesus came in the flesh. And this is why John tells us that if you're going around teaching these things, if you embrace this to be true, you are an antichrist. You are against Jesus and you are against what he stood for. And this is probably something that John personally abhorred, because in many of his writings in the New Testament, we see him teach these very subtle things to denounce this idea. We see hints of this in the gospel, and we see this, of course, very clearly in his letters. Notice what he wrote in 1 John chapter 1, verse 1. 1 John chapter 1, verse 1. John writes, "What was from the beginning, what we have heard, what we have seen with our eyes, what we have looked at, what we have touched with our hands concerning the words of life." John always emphasizes the physical nature of Jesus. Remember what he talked about in his gospel. He talked about how Jesus came in the flesh and tabernacled among us. He lived among us. And not only did John live with him and eat with him and spend time with him, but as we know from John's own account, he was the only apostle to stay and watch him die. It appears all the other apostles were too scared. So not only did he see his life, he saw his death, and according to John chapter 20, verse 20, he saw the risen Lord and the marks of his crucifixion. So we can imagine how personally John took this idea that some were going around saying Jesus didn't actually come in the flesh. He didn't actually experience what you and I experience. And this is why I think he in many of his letters, including this, he is so extensive in condemning it and explaining how detrimental it is to one's faith. But John said in reference to people of this nature, you're not to let them in your home or to even greet them. Now, I think you can imagine, I'm a pretty friendly guy. At least I try to be. I try to greet everyone I see, especially people who I know religiously disagree with me, because I want to sit down, I want to have a conversation. I want to hear their arguments. I want them to hear my arguments, and it's something that I enjoy doing. But could I be going too far? Could I be saying hello too much? Should I be more careful about who I greet or who I let in my home? Well, let's look at verse 10. John says that if you let them into your home, you're partaking in their sin. Well, is this more than just inviting them inside? Well, I think it is. In the first century, what a lot of people would do, especially those who were religious, is they would invite missionaries and preachers to stay in their home. For example, if you were going around preaching the gospel, there wasn't usually a motel or a hotel you could stay on, so you were dependent on fellow Christians or new converts. One of the clearest examples of this is in Acts 16:15, when Lydia, the first European convert, converts to Christianity. She compels Paul and those with him to stay in her home. I like what Luke writes in verse 15. He says that she prevailed over us. Basically, she urged us strongly for them to come and stay with her because she wanted to support their work. She wanted to give them a little bit of a base of operation so they could have a place to stay and they can go out and preach and teach. And of course, hospitality was so key at this time. So John is probably not saying you can't invite someone you disagree with to come over to your home and have a Bible study or anything like that. But what John seems to be dealing with is the idea of using your home or your means to support someone who is teaching a false doctrine. Now, of course, what people would do is they would allow preachers and missionaries into their home, which was a good thing if they were teaching the truth. But if you were to allow a false teacher, someone who was, for example, teaching that Jesus did not come in the flesh, if you were going to lodge them up, put them up for a few days and allow them to preach in your town, you were contributing to what they were doing. You were helping them. You were aiding in their sin. And because of what you were doing, souls could be lost over that. Now, I certainly wouldn't want to support a false teacher. I'm sure you wouldn't either. And that seems to be what John is dealing with. But he goes so far as to say, you can't even give them a greeting. Now, I'm pretty sure John is not saying you can't say hello or ask how you're doing. I'm pretty sure that's not what he's talking about. John is talking about a very specific greeting, a greeting of encouragement that doesn't really come as clear, doesn't really come through as much in the English. There is one English word that fits here, but it's a word we never ever use. At least it's a word I've never used. The word for greeting here is hiero, and it's the same word used by Judas in Matthew chapter 26, verse 49, to approach Jesus in the garden. It's a very respectful greeting. And the closest word that fits this word in English is the word hail. I don't remember the last time I used the word H-A-I-L to say hello to someone, but it fits the definition. The definition for hail is to cheer, to salute, to greet, to welcome, to acclaim, or to approve enthusiastically. The idea is you don't want to even give approval with your words to a false teacher. And I think the King James Version captures the idea here. The King James Version says, "For he that biddeth him Godspeed is partaker of his evil deeds." Now I know I don't really use the term Godspeed a lot. I'm pretty sure you don't either. But the idea behind it is that when you would use this word, it means to wish someone well, to wish someone good fortune or success in their endeavors. What John is basically saying is that, when you see a false teacher, someone you know who is teaching false things, you don't want to wish them success. You don't want them to do well in what they're doing. Ideally, you want them to fall on their face and quit so they'll stop it. Or ideally, learn from their errors, but if not, you want them to fail. You don't want them to continue to do what they're doing. The idea is you don't even want to use your words to support a false doctrine. Now, one may say, well, does it really matter? Does wishing someone good luck or God bless in reference to these endeavors, does that really make a difference? Well, yes, it does. I think it does. When you encourage me, when you let me know when I'm doing a good job, that's encouragement to me. It helps me. It gives me stamina and perseverance to keep going. This works for false teachers as well. Mark Twain once said, "I can live 2 months off a good compliment." And I think there's a lot of truth to that. It's encouraging when people tell you you're doing a good job or support what you're doing. And this is really good if you tell this to a gospel preacher. But if you're telling it to a false teacher, you're encouraging them to continue doing what they're doing. And that might be even more encouragement than monetary support. If someone tries to rebuke them or change their mind and they know they have people they know in their mind they have people who support them, who encourage what they're doing, they're going to want to keep teaching that particular doctrine. And of course, we don't want that at all. And John says that, if we give people like this lodging or support or verbal support, we're participating in their evil deeds. So let's talk about how we can apply this principle in our everyday life. Let's continue with the spiritual application. We as Christians should be careful who we support in a religious way. That doesn't mean we can't say hello or greet people that we disagree with. I think we as Christians have a duty and an obligation to be as friendly as possible. I know for me personally, I try to talk to as many people as possible. It helps I'm an extrovert. I don't expect everyone to be that way. I'm very extroverted. It's very easy for me to do that. I will talk to anyone who will disagree with me. I will have anyone over to my house who disagrees with me, as long as they're willing to tell me what they believe and they're willing to listen to what I believe. I don't care if they're Baptist or Catholic or Jehovah's Witnesses or a practitioner of Islam. As long as you're willing to sit down and have a conversation, I'll sit down and have a conversation with you. But we as Christians ought to be careful with our words and our actions, because I as a Christian do not ever want to indicate to someone who I know believes a false doctrine that they're okay, that what they're doing isn't going to cost their soul. Now, what I might do is I might try to highlight where we agree and start from there, but I don't ever want to word things in such a way that they think that I approve of what they're doing, or that I agree with them, or that I think they're okay before God when they're not. And we should be very careful the way we talk to other people, that we don't give them the impression that we support what they do. But this, of course, applies to many areas. For example, I would never give money to an organization that wasn't preaching the truth, or an organization that was preaching false doctrine. I remember that about a year, I guess it was about 2 years ago, I was walking to the mall, and there was this man raising money for a rehab center, and he approached me, and I thought it was a very clever way. He walked up to me and he said, "You look like a man who's about to say no to a charity." I was like, well, never been approached that way. Okay, I'll hear you out. I want to prove him wrong. That's the psychology behind it. So I stood there and I listened, and it seemed like a very good rehab center. He said it was something that he went through himself and that he was just trying to raise money for. Gave me some information on it, and if I could help, I wanted to help. And so I went home, did some research, and it turned out it was run by some evangelical organization. And apparently they were doing a lot of good. But unfortunately, one of the things they were also doing was teaching false doctrine to the people who went into that facility. They were also giving them false ideas about what they needed to do to be saved. They were giving people, unfortunately, a false sense of security. And I thought to myself, well, if I want to give money to an organization, I don't want to give money to an organization that is going to support false doctrine. I can give my money somewhere else, or to another institution maybe run by someone in the Brotherhood. And so, I made the decision based off the principle here. It's not where I want to send my money. I also wouldn't want to give housing to a traveling missionary or preacher who was preaching false doctrine. I also wouldn't want to volunteer for another religious group, or to help an event that was run by another religious group who was promoting false doctrine. And so, I think we have to keep in mind that in every aspect of our life, when it comes to spiritual matters, we don't want to live our lives, we don't want to speak in such a way that gives people the impression that we support or agree with their false teaching. But this principle also applies in reference to capital, in reference to money. We are blessed to live in a society where usually we can be pretty flexible with how we spend our money. And one helpful thing about the way our system is set up is that typically the marketplace is an indication of what people value. Let me just give you just a brief example. Take Arby's and Chick-fil-A. They're two things I very much enjoy. But I know the marketplace, I know most people value Chick-fil-A more than Arby's. Well, how do I know that? Well, when I go to Arby's, I typically see anywhere from 0 to 6 people in the drive-through line. Whenever I go to Chick-fil-A, there's typically 15 to 30 people there wrapped around the building trying to get their food. That kind of lets me know that most people value Chick-fil-A more than Arby's. Arby's is still good, but people seem to value Chick-fil-A more. But, this doesn't just help with fast food. This helps with all kinds of things. We can see what people spend money on. We can see what's popular. We can see the products and the things that are marketed to see what people value. And, when I look at the marketplace, when I look at the internet, what people are watching and enjoying, unfortunately, I know most people do not value Christian values based off what they watch and they enjoy. Let me give you an example. According to IMDb, the show Game of Thrones is considered the most watched show of all time. It's been around about a decade. Yeah, it came out about 2010, and even though, there have been many shows that have been very popular, even much older than that, it's right now considered the most popular show of all time. And I'll admit, when it came out, and I saw the commercials, it piqued my interest because it was set in a fantasy realm, and I heard it was a good story, and it had all the geeky things that I enjoy. So I thought, well, maybe I'll watch this. And then I found out, well, it was produced by HBO, and I realized it's probably not going to produce anything that is consistent with my values, so I didn't watch it. And a few years later, I heard a director describe the show. And this director was trying to make his own show. He said, well, I was really inspired by Game of Thrones. He said, you see, what they tried to do is they tried to treat sex and nudity like wallpaper. It was in every scene. It was in the background. They tried to make it as graphic as possible because that's what people want. And that's what people will pay for. And unfortunately, companies and businesses stationed in Hollywood know that. That's what people value. That's what people will pay for. And unfortunately, it's not just secular people. It's Christians too. It's even members of the church. Because, unfortunately, many people of the world, and even many of our brethren, do not value the things we should. One survey said that 65% of the United States claimed some form of Christianity. Now, they may not be members of the church, but that's how they identify. And you would think if all these people identified with Christianity and claimed to value Christian values, our marketplace would look a little different, that businesses would cater to a different audience. But it doesn't seem that way. And in light of that, I think we as Christians should be very careful how we spend our money, how we spend our dollars. Because when we spend money for a particular show or movie or music, it's going to support something. And I hope it's something that we can stand behind as Christians. Now you may say, well, what about taxes? Sometimes the government uses taxes for un-Christian-like things, and sometimes, unfortunately, that is true. But we know, according to the teachings of Jesus and the teachings of Paul, that we have an obligation as Christians to pay taxes because it's the job of the government to execute justice. Sometimes they may fail, sometimes they might misuse our taxes, but that is on them. It's not on us. We have to do our part. It's their obligation to do our part. But we as Christians, especially Christians in the 21st century, have something that I think Christians of the first century would envy. We have the right to vote. We have a say in who runs our country. And if you think about it from the lens of history, that's so revolutionary. For most of history, most people were stuck with the ruler. They were born with one family ruling over the particular realm, and his son and his son's son, and that was that. They had no say. They had no option. We as Christians have a say, at least the chance to have a say in who runs our nation at a state level and, of course, at a federal level as well. And if God is going to judge us in who we support with our money, who we support with our home, who we support with our own words, I am certain that God is going to judge us on how we vote as well. And this is something we should take very seriously every time we have the opportunity to vote, no matter what kind of election it is. It is something we should take with the utmost responsibility. Solomon tells us in Proverbs chapter 14, verse 33, righteousness exalts a nation, but sin is a disgrace to any people. And, every time that we as a Christian decide to cast our vote, we should ask ourselves, is the person we are voting for going to promote righteousness, or are they going to promote sin? Our vote as Christians should represent what God values and what we should value as Christians. And thankfully, we live in the internet age, and if we wanted to know anything about a candidate, we can go to the internet. They all make websites saying, this is what I want to do, and this is what I plan to do with my office. Of course, they could lie, but we don't know that till it happens. But at least we have the website to go off of. And we also have everything they have possibly ever said on YouTube recorded. And so we can get a fair judge of who they are. And yeah, I think whenever we are making a decision, we should take the evidence we have, and we should try to vote in the most Christian way possible. Now, of course, I think when it comes to politics, there are many things Christians can disagree on, such as taxes or energy or how to handle immigrations. I think there are so many things that we can disagree on. But when it comes to things of Christian values, when it comes to things of ethics, we should take this very seriously, and we should make sure that our vote, our support, represents what God wants. And from time to time, that may even mean not voting at all. I have known some Christians that I have a lot of respect for. And when it has come to certain elections in the past, they honestly said, well, I can't in good conscience vote for either. And from time to time, at a local or federal or whenever, that might be an option we're faced with. So I think that's something we have to keep in mind as well, that whoever we decide to vote for, whatever kind of election it is, it should be something we should be able to put our faith behind. So in conclusion, we are given so much freedom in our country. We are given freedom to practice and enjoy our religious values. We have freedom of association. We have freedom to choose what we do with our own capital to a great degree. And we have freedom to vote for who we choose. And in light of all these blessings, and in light of how many ways we can show our support for so many different kinds of people, we should never take this for granted. We should take this very seriously. Because, according to Jesus in Matthew chapter 10, verses 40 through 42, when we support someone who's doing the work of the Lord, we get to share in their reward. Jesus tells us that, whoever helps a prophet receives a prophet's, whoever receives a prophet receives a prophet's reward. Whoever receives a righteous man receives a righteous man's reward. And Jesus basically said, even something as simple as a cup of cold water is noticed. But John also points out here in 2 John verses 7 through 11 that it's not just who we support for good, but it's also who we support for evil. We always want to partake to the best of our ability in someone else's good doing, but we never want to partake in someone else's evil. So I think we should always be cautious as we live our Christian lives that whoever we support, whether it's with our means, our money, our house, or even as something as simple with our words, we're always representing God and what He wants with our support. Now, before we conclude, if there's anyone here tonight who is not a Christian, who believes that Jesus Christ is the Son of God, and you're willing to repent and put Christ on in baptism for the remission of your sins, we would love to help you with that right now. But if you're here tonight and you simply need the prayers of the congregation for whatever is going on in your life or for whatever you're concerned about, or maybe there's some sin in your life you'd like to confess, if there's anything we can pray for, God will certainly hear our prayers and help you in any way that He can, or any way that you need. If there's anything we can do for you spiritually, please come forward as we stand and sing.